This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you've come to the right place. Today's guest is unique. We're going to be speaking with Ken Getz, who is internationally recognized as an expert in drug development, and he's extremely well known throughout the Pharmaverse. For the last 20 years, he's been a professor and thought leader at Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, or the CSDD, at Tufts School of Medicine. He's also the founder of CISCRIP, a nonprofit for the education of the public as it relates to the role clinical trials play. And on top of that, he sits on a number of boards, including WCG. So if you're in any way, shape, or form involved in drug development, you're going to love this next half hour with Ken Getz. Ken, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the introduction as well.
Of course. I'm dying to dive right in here. So I have to ask this question to start off, and I hope it doesn't cause any offense, but you're an internationally recognized thought leader when it comes to drug development. You're a professor at Tufts School of Medicine, but you have a marketing background. How did you get involved in clinical trials?
What a great opening question. And if anything, I think it really spells out some of the areas of expertise that have really been brought into the drug development enterprise over the last 20, 30 years. It is true, I have a marketing background in graduate school where I received my MBA. That was one of my areas of focus. I also focused on managerial economics and strategy management, or management strategy. And I think the key there is that up until the 1980s and early 90s, there was so much of a focus on great science in drug development. And then people like me came along and brought some of the management expertise, some of the insights into how to think about managing drug development professionally as a business enterprise, as a marketplace, and as an area where there are huge opportunities for operational improvement as well. And we've actually seen over the last 20, 30 years growing desire to connect the scientific expertise with better ways of managing that science. So I was really in the right place at the right time.
I see the connection now, and it's funny. Every leader that I'm interviewing, they all speak to this right place, right time. It's almost like there's this serendipity that happens, but you have to put yourself in that right place, and that connection makes a lot of sense with your MBA. Now, I've spent the last few hours listening and watching to a lot of the interviews that you've done, and I've learned a lot about clinical trials, but I've also seen how complex this whole thing is. So to simplify it, what would you say is the main message that you can share to listeners who are developing medicines?
It's a great question. There are so many messages, but I think the largest area of theme that really relates to everything that we do at the Tufts Center is how to best manage growing complexity of all aspects of drug development, whether it's the science, whether it's operational and executional areas, the manufacturing of ever more complex molecules. So it's the overriding message is how can we best manage and optimize the drug development process? And the great enemy of efficiency and optimization is really that complexity that we focus on so actively. And it unfolds and is manifest in so many different ways, Michael. As I mentioned, the scientific complexity is an area that we know and understand well, but operational complexity touches every single aspect of drug development. And we have the good fortune at the Tufts Center of being able to gather empirical evidence that really helps inform the impact that complexity is having on cycle times and patient recruitment and retention effectiveness, for example, on data quality and data management. Complexity really touches every one of those areas and wreaks havoc and drives uncertainty and inefficiency and higher costs in every single domain within the drug development enterprise.
Let me pull on a string there. Drug prices are always a hot topic. Like whenever I'm at a dinner party and I tell them I'm anywhere related to the pharmaceutical industry, boom, I'm getting nailed with why are prices so high? What most people don't understand is that it really starts with the drug development side. Drugs are so incredibly expensive to develop, and there's so many failures along the way. So let's talk about how costs can be reduced. Any thoughts there?
That's a question that we have seen interest in for the 50 plus years that I know the center has existed, right? We've been monitoring the rising cost, and it has not really been addressed in any systematic way. And there's a lot of different aspects to it. There's specific drug development program, the cost to run a clinical trial. And to your point, those costs are so much higher than people realize. Just acknowledging the difficulty to identify patients, now many of them with a very, very specific genotype, for example. So that's a big part of it, and how to reach patients all over the world, where trials now are not conducted in simple single country locations, but we're doing these massive global trials. Then there's all of the costs that led to the clinical research, all of the animal model studies that were conducted, the basic science that led to that. So all of the sort of research side before we even get to development. And the biggest cost of all is the cost of failures. So right. Also when I'm at dinner parties and people say, this aspirin that I'm taking should only cost me a couple of cents. And when I remind people that, 70 cents on every dollar that we spend for any medication, it does not come anywhere close to the cost for all the failures. 70 cents on every dollar spent is just for the failures. And then we have the direct costs and other capitalized costs. So it's a very difficult area. How do we address the costs?
Yes.
There are lots of approaches that are being used or considered. Can we rely on electronic health and medical information and real-world evidence to replace or supplement some of the data that we're collecting? And can we use that data to gather insight into how patients will respond to an investigational therapy without actually having to conduct the trial itself? That's an important area. There are ways that we're looking to automate different elements of clinical research activity. AI may play a part in that as well. Yeah. And so we're hoping that we can compress the time and reduce the manpower that we need to conduct these studies. So there's lots of approaches that are being considered. None of them have made a measurable impact yet.
Okay. Well, that's not good news, Ken. When I told a few people that I was going to be talking to you, and they got kind of giddy. And one person asked, and you already mentioned it, about AI. Do you foresee a way that AI will reduce cost or impact the drug development landscape?
We see many, many areas. In fact, that's a place where we're doing a lot of research right now at the center, where we're really trying to gather use cases. We know, for example, that AI is already having an impact on the identification of sites and patients that may be important targets for a new therapy. And it's amazing what AI has been able to do in terms of culling huge amount of data in order to identify those potential targets and partners in our studies. We see AI being used now in pharmacovigilance to really look at adverse event patterns and serious adverse events, and to try to even predict and anticipate when those might occur so that we can address that in faster without allowing a trial to progress as long as it does before those patterns typically emerge through a data safety monitoring board, a very manual process. We see AI being introduced in the review of a lot of the data that we're collecting during trials. It's coming from so many sources: wearable devices, clinical outcome assessment technologies. So these are all places where we're very excited. But I think part of the question and the giddiness is that it's all very aspirational at this time, right? We see individual case examples. It's very hard to predict where we might see widespread adoption.
Yeah. As someone who's really on the periphery of all this, as a recruiter, my thought was, hey, well, can't AI just tell us if the drug's going to work or not? But really, until you put the medicine in a person, no one really knows what's going to happen. Is that fair?
So it's a wonderful thought, and there are those who believe that it all is predicated on the quality of the data that we're ultimately able to interrogate using sophisticated analytical approaches as well as AI, generative AI in particular. So there may come a day when, as part of sort of the concept of a learning health system, all data about you, Michael, about your health, your lifestyle, your diet, everything will be just constantly updated in a real-time data set about your health journey. And there may come a day when AI can very quickly anticipate, based on the data that's available, a particular condition that may be developing and what types of therapies may either already be available or may be in testing that might be appropriate. That for us, the question is not about if it will happen, but when. And it could obviously the quality of data. And we don't really have unified data platforms. We don't have truly harmonized, rich data sets right now. So there's just so much that has to happen fundamentally before we can kind of realize the potential that exists. It's a very exciting time, but also one where I think most of us wonder whether it would even happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, it's a provocative idea, sort of sci-fi. Now, circling back to complexity, from an outsider looking in, it seems like my clients are having such a hard time enrolling people into the trials. Getting enrollment, hitting the enrollment goals on the timeline. And of course, the more they're over the timeline, the more they're over budget, then the higher the price has to be. It's like all this compounding effect. This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one-source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. What are the biggest challenges to keeping a trial on timeline and then enrolling?
Right. Well, so I think you've cited one of the largest challenges of all, which is the entire domain or continuum of recruitment and retention, really beginning with screening, study volunteers. That's an incredibly demanding process, and our screen failure rates continue to rise as our protocols become more complex. Yeah. Then, of course, being able to randomize, very, very difficult, especially in oncology and some of our most active areas. And retention today is also just a massive challenge. And complexity really adds to that because not only is it hard to find patients who meet very, very elaborate and stringent number of eligibility criteria, but once they're in the study, we put them through so many procedures across so many visits spread out over such a long period of time that a lot of patients give up and decide that it's just too difficult for them to stay in the trial. So complexity creates so much burden and scares patients away. A very high percentage of patients choose not to even sign the informed consent form because they think the trial will be too demanding. So complexity really challenges every aspect of patient enrollment in our studies. So that's a really big area. It also adds burden for our sites to administer and execute on the protocol. And when a site has limited manpower, perhaps it has competing clinical trials, it knows that it's going to be difficult to find and attract and keep patients in their studies. It also really challenges the site performance in the study as well.
Wow. Another thing I've noticed that I'd love to get your thoughts on, I keep a keen eye on, like, once a drug gets to phase 3 for my personal business, like, my attention's on that thing. And it just seems like we've had a lot of phase 3 drug failure, like the failure rate is really high. And I know Tufts CSDD publishes trends data. Is it annually that you do that?
So the success rate analysis we do every 3 to 5 years,
Okay.
and there are a number of other sources that I think are updating it annually. The methods vary a bit, but they all pretty much confirm the same thing, that our failure rates are the highest they've ever been in our history, and that despite the fact that we have such full pipelines of activity today, less than 10% of all drugs that make it through clinical testing will ultimately be approved and make it into the market. And in oncology and CNS, our two most active areas, the success rates are half the average, only 1 in 20, Michael. So
Oh.
it's if we could impact success rates alone, we would be seeing so many more drugs entering the marketplace and ultimately addressing unmet medical needs. So there's just a massive need to address these high failure rates today.
So is it, I know we talked about complexity, we talked about retention, we talked about these other things. Is that why there's the failures, or what is, can you pinpoint it on why these, or is there just so many different factors?
Like everything else, and that's probably I'm like a broken record. It's probably the same answer I give all the time.
Yeah.
There never is one thing that we can
Right.
point to, right? Some of the drugs that we're studying are so complex and have a safety profile and elevated risk for patients that don't justify the benefit, right? So that clearly the science plays a part, but often we're collecting data that where we haven't gathered sufficient evidence to demonstrate efficacy and safety, and it could be due to the fact that the protocol is too difficult, that it's been hard to execute. We can't attract enough patients to power the study adequately. The design of the study was such that we really failed to really demonstrate the benefits and of the drug. And then there are also other factors that contribute to failure rates. Sometimes a company may pull a drug because it may be showing promise, but it's too small a market opportunity. It's hard to justify the investment that will be required. And so even for marketing or commercialization reasons, a company may feel that the drug just doesn't have a chance to be differentiated in the marketplace and to successfully capture the portion of the market it needs to justify the investment.
Those are sad statistics. I gotta say, I mean, I work a lot in oncology, and 1 out of 20 make it. That's incredible. Now, it sounds like the work that you and your colleagues are doing at Tufts CSDD is fantastic. How can pharma leaders become part of what you're doing there?
Right. I really appreciate that question. We're really a one-of-a-kind group that conducts macro level sort of academic studies to gather empirical evidence that informs everyone in the drug development ecosystem. And we're an independent academic group, which is really unusual in this day and age. We have a lot of companies that collaborate with us, and I think they choose to collaborate for two primary reasons, but there's a third important one as well. They collaborate to sort of help share areas that they believe are the most pressing, for which they would like to see empirical evidence really inform them. So really some of the most pressing strategic issues that impact us all in drug development, many of the ones that you and I have already talked about. And they do it in part because they know that the quality and the robustness of the empirical evidence that we gather really sets us apart. And it is very frequently quoted and cited. We testify before Congress. We publish our data in peer review in some of the most notable peer review areas: Nature Review, JAMA, Health Affairs, Pharmaceutical Medicine. And that really leads to the third area. Many companies see value in having us out there because we address a lot of the misinformation, a lot of the myths, a lot of the misconceptions. When hard data is presented, it's the best way to inform policy and regulation and legislation. So a lot of organizations really support the center because they believe in our mission, and they know that that empirical evidence is essential to our success as an enterprise, and making sure that we have really the right collaboration and partnership with every stakeholder that can impact drug development.
Wow. Yeah, you got to be really proud of the work that you guys are doing. That's great.
Thank you.
Another question that I personally have, what I've been noticing is that during COVID, during the pandemic, getting patients enrolled became even more of a logistical nightmare. And then, so there was this gap in enrollment, or a slowdown in enrollment. And of course, as that drug continues to develop, then there's a lag time of a potential approval. And so I feel like there's this gap in innovation. But then I heard you say that it's not really there's a gap in innovation. It's just there's a lot of phase 3 failures. Is there both going on right now, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, wow. So let's unpack that question, Michael, because
Okay.
you touch on a lot of things that are essentially exist in perpetuity. One is that if you look at our pipelines, even before the pandemic, there are periods of time where phase 3 seems to be more active. You have more candidates. A lot of it really depends on what's flowing through the earlier stages of the pipeline. Leading up to the pandemic, phase 3 was a more active period. We were seeing more trial starts. But if you looked at historically, you'd see that there was kind of a little bit of a lower level of newer projects flowing through. So that's always happening. No question, the pandemic caused this massive shift and pivoting to focus on COVID vaccines and treatments. And so we did see trial delays, but those eventually picked up. A very small percentage of studies were discontinued. So you have that effect too, but it kind of was a little bit more of a ripple effect. We didn't see it for about 2 years until after the pandemic had started to recede. So you have those two things going on at once. Projects that were delayed that are now flowing through, and also a pipeline where the volume of new trial starts is kind of spotty and a little bit more variable. And those two things have contributed to a lower relative phase 3 pipeline at this time.
Got it. Are there things in clinical trials that are just forever changed because of the pandemic?
So that's a question I would love to hear from your viewers. I think everybody has a different opinion about this. From my perspective, I don't think anything structural or in terms of practice or solution has actually changed. But I think what has changed is the realization, the awareness of what's possible if we align all of the different elements in our ecosystem so that in unison we're mobilized to address a singular global health crisis, right? We got federal funding. We had regulatory agencies suddenly proactively accommodating changes and pivots. We saw data sharing and open collaboration all around the world. We saw companies contributing genomic data so that everybody could understand what was needed here. We got our sites and our operating professionals to align on what adjustments needed to be made and what virtual and remote solutions might support us. And you made a point about enrollment during the pandemic. The patient enrollment in COVID trials was unprecedented. People really came
Right.
forward really for altruistic reasons. So anyway, when we get
Oh,
all
really?
of these pieces to align, Michael, then you see what the unprecedented outcome, which was the development of highly effective and safe treatments in literally 30% of the time it normally takes to develop a new vaccine.
I got to tell you, Ken, I've learned so much about clinical trials, and I hope our listeners have as well. But sadly, our time is starting to come to an end here. I wanted to ask one last question about your non-for-profit CISCRIP, the Center for Information and Study of Clinical Research Participation, right? Is that it? Did I
You
get it?
nailed it. You
All
got
right.
a medal. You pronounced it correctly. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, how can those that have the want to, how can we support this cause, and what are you guys doing there?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question as well. CISCRIP is a nonprofit that's really dedicated to educating patients and the public about the important role that clinical research plays, as you noted at the beginning. And CISCRIP also provides a wide variety of services, all free to patients and their families, to help engage them as partners in the research process. So all of our programs and all of our funding comes from organizations that support them, so that we can offer them free of charge to patients and their families. We have some companies that fund a lot of our broad public education programs. One is our public service announcement called the MT Pharmacy, which you can access through YouTube. It's essentially a video that's designed to teach the public about the importance of clinical research without them even knowing that they're being educated. It's a very engaging. We're doing all kinds of creative things like that. We have so many community engagement educational models where we bring research and education into communities in partnership with a lot of the major health conferences, but we also have a mobile RV unit that brings them out. We're introducing clinical research education into public schools for children. So it's we're touching all these areas, and it wouldn't be possible without the support of the NIH and government agencies and industry. Everything that we receive, we obviously it supports our staff, but also goes to support those programs.
Wow, great work. That must be really rewarding. So,
Very proud of CISCRIP. Yeah, it's now over 20 years old and has won so many awards, and most importantly, has really been able to provide real service and benefit to patients and the public.
Ken, you really are a star within pharma. Even though you're on the periphery there, you really have impacted pharma in a tremendous way. So, on behalf of all in the Pharmaverse, I just want to thank you for your time and your profound insights. And your vantage point is so important, especially to a lot of the folks that are listening. So thank you, and all the best on all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say it's been truly a privilege to be able to observe and analyze and share our data and insights. So I feel deeply appreciative and grateful for the privilege that I've had to have this vantage point. So thank you for having me, Michael, and really look forward to seeing what kind of response we get to people who are watching the podcast, and hopefully I'll have a chance to come and speak with you again sometime.
That'd be great. That'd be great, Ken. Ken Getz is a great follow on LinkedIn. The Tufts CSDD publishes some amazing data. I would highly recommend that. But this wraps up another episode of the Pharmaverse. Many more great leaders still to come. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.